What's up? I thought I'd make a video on travel nursing. I am not an expert on travel nursing whatsoever, but for the last like 3 to 4 months, I've been working as a travel nurse and I feel like I have a little bit of experience with travel nursing. So I thought I would share my experience with you and hopefully you can take away something that'll help you with your life. So I guess what I first should start off with is I haven't traveled actually anywhere, and you don't have to travel anywhere to be a travel nurse. In fact, I've just stayed locally and I still work for a travel agency. But what I will say is that to get a travel stipend, at least with the company that I worked at or that I'm working with, I think I have to travel beyond 50 miles from my residence to get that travel stipend, which is super nice because the stipend is completely untaxed, right? So what I often see, or what I've often seen so far, is that you can travel, your hourly rate will be less, but then you get this stipend. And sometimes they have different packages. Like this one company, for instance, you could pick like a higher stipend and a lower hourly rate, or you could have a higher hourly rate and a lower stipend. I think the best, like if you go through and do the math, which is what I did with this one company, your total amount was relatively the same for every month, but I feel like you would just want to go with the bigger stipend because it's untaxed, so you're making more because you're getting taxed less. For the current company that I work for, which is supplemental healthcare, and I don't think I've signed anything that says that I can't give out this information, hopefully, and they've been a great company, and I've talked to like a bunch of different nurses. I feel like I'm the only nurse that I've talked to that's actually worked for supplemental healthcare. Like a lot of nurses mention Action, I believe, and they seem to be fairly happy with Action. There's another one too that starts with like a W that I'm forgetting. Maybe it's like WSI, but I know Action, from all the nurses that I spoke with, Action is a very good company to work for, and I work for supplemental healthcare and I have no issues with them. They've been really great with me. So I make $60 an hour locally, and with the other agencies that I've looked for, like with our local state hospital around here, it's interesting because like you'll get 3 or 4 different travel agencies offering the same position at the same location for different rates. It's crazy. Like in some places are super cheap, some places will pay you more. And I have no idea like what the workings are behind the scene. My guess is that it's probably like an 80-20 split on average, where like a nurse, let's just say that you're making $80 an hour, then I would guess the travel agency itself is probably making $20 an hour, which is pretty damn dope if you think about it. Like if I was more entrepreneurial, I would probably try to start my own little like travel agency, because I feel like if you got enough nurses and stuff, man, you can make really good bank. But that's my guess. Like if there's anyone out there who works for a travel nurse agency, I'd be really curious to see like what is the cut. Like 80% in the favor of the nurse, 20% for the company. I really have no idea. Another thing that I think you probably could do, and I've thought about it myself, is like, bro, if I'm getting like 60 an hour, that probably means that whatever 20% of that is, 10% would be, what is that, 6? So 12. So that means that every time I work an hour, my company that I'm working for is maybe getting around $12 an hour. So it's like, well, why couldn't I just approach a facility and be like, yo, I make $60 now. I know you're paying my travel company like this amount probably. Like let's cut out the middleman. I'll work for you for like 70 an hour. But I mean, I'm not thinking about doing that only because I feel like there's a lot of legwork involved. Plus you can have benefits and things like that. So I don't know. But I think if you're super entrepreneurial, there's probably some nurses out there that do that, which is kind of cool because you cut out the middleman, you make more money for yourself, and I feel like it's a win-win situation for everybody. And then I guess just when I got hired on, they check your credentials, they check to make sure you have a degree from an accredited university. I had to go through like a physical. I think I had to give like a urine sample, some blood work. Something else that's kind of crazy is I am a pothead. And I was like, I just want to be straight up with you guys. Like when I go to pee, it's going to pop hot for marijuana because I do it every night to help me sleep. So then it was kind of interesting. Like here in Colorado, you can work for a government agency and do marijuana regularly, and it's not a big issue whatsoever. We got fortunate in that regard. I don't know why I'm mentioning that. It's just something that, I guess it was something I was kind of paranoid about. I was like, if I have to do a urine test, a drug test, I know like I'm going to be positive for marijuana. So I'm just going to be upfront with you guys. And it's funny because like some people, some of the recruiters that I talked to at various agencies weren't aware, and they're just like, no, that automatically disqualifies you. And I'm glad that I did my own research, because I was like, no, it actually does not. Like, let me share the link with you. Our governor said it's okay. If you go onto the state's website, you can see they don't discriminate for people who use marijuana. So that's kind of cool, because had I not done that, I don't think I actually would have ever landed a job. And then when I did my orientation for this job, I mean, I met with a lot of nurses, and and a lot of them just seemed to like whatever travel agency they were working for. Once in a while, I would talk to a nurse and they'd be like, oh, I worked for this travel agency. I don't trust them anymore. But then I'd talk to another nurse and they worked for that same travel agency and they loved them. So I feel like it's one of those like very anecdotal things. And then like once someone had mentioned something about like the company that I worked for, which was supplemental and some sort of weird like pay thing. And they're like, well, make sure you read your contract, which I think is definitely important. Like I always read my contract, make sure you read your contract, you understand your contract. And I've never had any issues with my company whatsoever. It's been kind of nice, but I will say like, you definitely want to read the fine print of your contract. Like I'd say that's probably first and foremost, one of the most important things, because you never know what your contract might, like anything could be, the sky's the limit as far as what could go inside of a contract, right? As a contract is a mutually binding agreement between two parties. So you really need to read your fine print. You really have no idea what your recruiting agency has contracted with your employer. Like that employer might be like, hey, I'll contract with your agency as long as you can guarantee that that nurse is going to be there 40 hours a week. And if they're not there 40 hours a week, then maybe they're going to get paid less. If they don't meet their minimum hours every week, maybe instead of getting 60 an hour, maybe they only get 50 an hour if they only show up for like 30 hours a week. So you really want to read the fine print of your contract, because you just don't know like what those stipulations are, unless of course you read it. And then another thing I would say is that probably your contract to some degree is negotiable. Like if you don't like what's in your contract, you can say, look, I'll take the position on the condition that we change X, Y, and Z in the contract. So don't feel like just because it's in the contract, like you have to sign it. I would say that a contract is sometimes something that you guys can kind of like negotiate what feels comfortable for you and what feels comfortable for the company. Okay, and then also like there's some agencies that are more than happy to give you OT if the employer that you're working for is super desperate. Like for instance, at this local state hospital that I worked at, I remember we had a ton of people that were agency nurses that were just banking on OT. At my current correctional facility, I rarely get OT, only because then I'm making like hella good bank and they just don't have the funds for it. But there's nothing that prevents you. Like if you're trying to get a ton of hours and your agency doesn't want to give you OT, then just work for another agency. Like you can work for two different agencies for the same employer, if that makes sense. So like if I wanted to go work at the state hospital and they're like, well, we don't want to pay you OT, I could just work for another agency and I could still get those hours. At least that's what I've seen other nurses do. All right, so let's say you want to make like a ton of bank as a travel nurse. If I wanted to make a ton of bank as a travel nurse, what I would do is I would travel to any location that was 50 miles outside my residence, and I would travel there only if I knew I could stay with somebody and they wouldn't charge me rent. Like that's the way to do it. So like if you have somebody that lives like an hour or two away, a friend, family member, whatever, and you could stay with them while you do your 3 12-hour shifts, that's the best way to make incredible bank. I would also say you probably want to make sure that you're getting scheduled for block shifts, like back-to-back block shifts. Like you don't want to work like a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because then you're going to have to stay there for probably Tuesday and Thursday. So then you'd be paying more money for rent on those days, if that makes sense. Something else I like about travel nursing is I don't feel married to the place that I'm working at. And you also have less there's less responsibility as a travel nurse than there is as a regular full-time state employee. Like the full-time state employees have to do some clerical work on the side that we are not assigned to as travel nurses. And I know that when I worked at the state hospital, it was similar to that. Like the travel nurses had way less responsibility than we as employees did. Which is awesome, right? You're making more money and you have less responsibility. And I'll say like at my current location right now, $60 an hour is probably like, I'm maybe getting paid a little more than the state employees. They make around like 45 to 47 an hour, but I don't have the same benefits. I don't get paid time off. And I would say that's like one of the downsides of working for a travel agency is the benefits typically aren't going to be as good as what a typical employer might offer. And then before accepting a travel contract, like I would look at other agencies to see what they offer for that same location. Because as I said earlier, you might have one facility that's paying you more and you're doing exactly the same thing. And I should mention that every travel agency that I've looked at does offer benefits. I just feel like after looking through their benefits, they're not at all comparable to what I had when I was working at a private or a state facility. It also feels just for me, it's like psychologically freeing knowing that I'm not tied down to a place. Like when I worked at the state hospital, for those of you that have watched some of my other videos, like I had a pretty terrible experience as far as working with a lot of the staff there. And it's nice knowing that like as a travel agency, if I find some location which is like, dude, I can't stand the people I work with, which is a huge component of the job, right? Like if you got crappy coworkers, the job sucks. It doesn't matter if it's your dream job, right? So it's nice just being able to just like dip out if I want to, or just like knowing that I can dip out if I want to. So yeah, I think that sums up my experience kind of overall with travel nursing. Highly recommend it. It's very nice not to actually have to travel to do it. You can just be local and still do it, which is convenient for me and my family. And yeah, I hope you found this video helpful.